Hello everyone, my name is Marina Seren and welcome to my new YouTube video where I talk about how the elite utilizes the simulation theory for control. In other videos, we were talking about how they are utilizing fractalization and trauma for control, and that goes in the line of the simulation theory and the dynamics that are needed to understand in order to have the complete picture, the let's say bigger picture, on all the metaphysical complex theories and information layers that are needed to understand in order to know how they are truly operating against us for control, for the manipulation of our mind, our consciousness, and even our surrounding reality. And that is the whole point that I believe that it's the best way to go forward with. Because again, we talk about how they use fractalization consciousness in order to create the segregation of these multiple personality disorder or inner systems where on an individual and collective layer, if there is fractalization, there is a pathway to create from a subtle perspective from the subconscious and the unconscious layers programming, scripted programming, ideas, beliefs, energies, etc., that can't be, let's say, executed in order to push a certain being towards a certain path or a certain specific action orientation, the changing on specific mental pathways, behavioral patterns, mental patterns, emotional patterns, and even influence on a level of, let's say, belief system or personality aspects, ideas around distortions and perceptions of the self that are not into harmony with what we are or what we are in a specific and individual level. And of course, other forms of manipulation, such as engineering. And this is a very important, very important concept here. Because, yes, we talk about the fact that mind control can actually create a form of subtle subconscious programming, right? Subconscious influence. When I say subtle, by the way, I don't mean that the effect is subtle necessarily. When we say subtle, we mean that what I shared in the previous video is that it's made from the subtle bodies, from the subconscious, because that's where the highest form of influence is. And we really explain why we said that the subconscious is the layer from which, there is a higher percentage of influence and there is the strongest form of influence that you can experience, because that which is unconscious, that which is the most unconscious and unknown, has an effect that is very powerful. Same matter, you're not aware, and since you're not aware, those subconscious forms of programming are pushing you into the direction or into the, let's say, the orientation that it is a program to be, because everything always tends to go to a 0 point balance, so it will try to go towards a point of integration. It will guide you towards a direction where it can be integrated so that it goes to that 0 point state of energy where it gets in a balance, in a harmonious state, because it's already not within polarity consciousness. It's not within the fractalization property that dichotomizes the consciousness, that polarizes the consciousness, right? So for that matter, it's very important what we just mentioned here, the aspect that we mentioned, that they work through subtle bodies, because the subconscious is what has the most powerful effect on us. But just because we see subtle does not mean that it's a subtle effect. It is a great effect. It is actually great in the sense that because it's unconscious, again, it's almost like automatically there's no willpower almost that can regularize that, that can change that, that can become aware of it and manipulate it, unless you make it conscious, and unless you do create a form of integration within your awareness, within your perception about it, in which you, let's say, are aware of it, and it no longer pushes you from that unconscious, perspective, right? From that unconscious position, right, where you're magically going there because there's no resistance. That's the word that I will use. There is no resistance there. So not having any resistance there, it's kind of like very automatic. It makes you flow towards where it's destining you to go to and towards. Because as we were saying, we already covered the fact that they do create a form of, let's say, influence and manipulation, alteration of your perception of self, on the self and the greater self, the being that you are, not just from the third dimensional personality construct, but also shared in all the multidimensional layers of your consciousness, and opening pathways in order to, let's say, be able to manipulate those layers in a way that they are creating not just control and manipulation of the perception of your own identity, right? And your own mindset, your own mental patterns and behavioral patterns, belief systems, but also an engineering of what we call the inner technologies of our consciousness. And of course, the manipulation of not just the mind and the self, but all together, because it's all part of the same, let's say, equation, and manipulation and in engineering and modification and intervention, interfering in what it's called our surrounding simulation, our surrounding reality. Because as we know, this reality is just but a projection of your own consciousness. So, as we said, let's continue with this series, with this video on how they use the so called simulation theory in order to use forms of control and engineering, not just on an individual level, but again, on a collective level. So, as we were saying before, we got to cover all of the theoretics that explain how they are able to not just target the influence of your own personality construct and your own self, your, let's say, identity, your mind, your psyche, but also all of the metaphysical multidimensional layers of your own consciousness, the greater self that you are, and these inner technologies. I want to go first, for that matter, with explaining the idea of what is this concept that I mentioned when I say inner technologies? Because it sounds a little bit, let's say, technical. Nevertheless, let's go forward and explain what do I mean with these inner technologies and why do I call them like that, right? You understand that your consciousness is, let's say, multi-dimensional, multi-layered, and we already explained that part, all of the different facets of the multi-dimensional consciousness, the layers and the sub-layers of our own awareness, etc., and how not all of the different subtle bodies that are within us, within our consciousness. But we are also aware that within our own energetic bodies, within the soul, the consciousness, there are a series of vortex energies, as we will call them, that are chakra energies, like vortex energy accesses to different layers or to different, let's say, expressions of archetypical elements within our own energetic bodies, within the soul structure, architecture, that we can define as the chakras within the chakra system. I'm sure that you are obviously know about what these chakras are about, and probably you are very familiarized with these concepts and you know the names of it. You know that we have seven approximately that are currently active or we're currently aware of or working on multiple layers and multidimensional layers. And you probably know that each of them are expressing an archetypical construct within our own consciousness, within our own self. They are vortex of energies that each of them, again, they are configuring to define one archetype, one specific archetype of our own energy centers, let's say, of our own auric field. These are the root chakra, the sacral chakra, the solar plexus chakra, the heart chakra, the throat chakra, the third eye, and the crown chakra. And of course, when we get to evolve to a higher integration of dimensional depth toward consciousness, the more that we get to evolve in the scale of density consciousness and we tap into the higher density aspects of our own genetics as humans, where the Anunnakis left their own higher density awareness, the Syrian, Pleiadians, Arcturians, etc., all these different beings, right? Um, we can observe and we will eventually be tapping and becoming aware of even more chakras above the number that we already expressed before. But we're currently working with seven, and it's a very archetypical pattern within our own reality that connects a little bit the dots of the idea of simulation and archetypical construct of reality that we will talk not only this video, because this is specifically, it's going to be focused specifically for the idea of control, but also for other videos that are more leaning towards the metaphysical side, how it's a very archetypically very well designed pattern that it's like a common factor, right? It is built up within this specific same number because within the construct of our reality it's meant to represent what it's outside, right? What's outside, it's just a projection of what's inside. These inner technologies, right? Truly nothing that we observe from the outside, it's outside truly of our consciousness. It's within the configuration of our own DNA, of our own of how our DNA is configured. Let's better say the way how our DNA is configured in the construct the of all these different archetypical configurations within consciousness, the map of the souls, right? Maybe the astrological chart, the chakra systems, the elements that we're working with, the Kabbalah, etc. All these different things, right? So as you can see then, what other aspects and constructs of our shared collective reality you can observe that are resonating and vibrating within that same idea of the seven number. Seven colors in the spectrum of the visible light to our own human eye, to our own perception, right? There are only seven principal colors within the spectrum of our visible light in our reality, what we call the rainbows, yes. What we call this rainbow, it's layered that way specifically. We can see red, yellow, orange, violet, blue, etc. That is why. It's because it's meant to represent archetypically that number, that construct, each ray of light. Because in both concepts, we are creating a sublayered expression of light where we can find not just a unified identity. When I say that there needs to be or there is a creation of sublayered expression of light, right? We're meant to create different systems, different structures, different constructs, different archetypical configurations of the expression of it so that there is an aspect of, let's say, identity, and there's a structure to how identity can be, let's say, like subdivided or fractalized within itself, the one being divided to create a structure, to create a system where we can use it to experience consciousness through it, filter consciousness through it, on a system, on a design configuration system structure, inner technologies note where I am trying to go towards with these explanations, so that there is a way to experience reality. There is a way for consciousness to experience itself, to make itself aware of itself. So yes, there needs to be a sublayered archetypical matrix that is created and configured for us to be able to explore the different expressions of self, the different expression of our consciousness, the different expressions of light that we are, so that we can have a system, again, to filter our consciousness through, to be able to create a form of interactive matrix, right? Where we are able to learn and to grow and to become aware of each of those aspects, and not just by themselves being isolated, but also interconnecting them, like creating different combinations and different experimenting with the different proportions, different perspectives, with different constructs within experience, right? And this is what we were talking about with this idea of the chakra system and the inner technologies. And remember that everything is light, the expression of light of our own consciousness. Everything is, let's say, a frequency modulation of the same field of light, which is all that it is. I'm gonna put this phrase that I posted some years ago, which says everything is but a frequency modulation of the same energy that is God. Well, you can say God, all that it is, whatever you prefer, but this also applies on an individual level. Every single aspect of your consciousness is made of the same universal essence, which is light. But because there are different layers and there are different, let's say, multidimensional layers that we already talked about, there are expressions of ourself and our soul, of our bodies, that are vibrating in different oscillations, in different vibrational frequencies that are of a higher frequency or lower frequency, therefore being some being lighter, some being denser, some being more close to the idea of light, actually within the spectrum of electromagnetic waves, which is light. Light is an electromagnetic wave. We have the electrical field and the magnetic field. This is the same with our bodies, except for the fact that because the vibration is much more denser, there's much more resistance in the dynamics of the vibrational oscillatory movements, there can be the concept of the expression of it in a material form, in a materialized form within reality. Again, all of this, don't worry that I will be explaining it much farther in a video making it specifically about these concepts, these metaphysical concepts. But on itself, everything is physical. There is only a difference between material and physical, which is material can adopt the denser structure to become an object within material reality, right? It is denser. It can be expressed within atoms, and those atoms can create laces and create structures, greater structures, and forms that appear to be actual, like, opaque objects, but they're not. This thing, for example, it's very solid, right? That is the sensation. My body, it's very solid, right? It looks like that could not be defined as physical, but it is, because everything is an expression of electromagnetic frequency. There is a wave duality particle theory within quantum physics that's been proven to be objective and true and validated within our own scientific community, and that goes in the line of what I'm trying to explain. Just because we say physical, we're not saying the same word as material. Everything is physical. Not everything is material, but everything is physical. Even the materials, because again, they are based on particles that have a duality that is called the wave dual particle duality. So yes, everything that is within space and time, everything, literally everything, is actually physical. So we were saying that the greater expression, the greater percentage of our own consciousness is expressed more into the, let's say, essence of electromagnetic frequency, and only the lower percentage, the lower percentage of it is expressed within the material realm, which will be our physical bodies, our biological bodies, because even the brain is like the computer of our own simulation. It is a computer of all the multidimensional aspects of our consciousness, but it doesn't get to be the consciousness itself, where consciousness emanates. It is just channeling in the biological way the expression of consciousness and not the other way around. So we can see all these different sublayers of the bodies being in what we call the auric field, that we already covered a little bit in the last video for just a little bit, in which we get to explain that this auric field is an expression of electromagnetic energy, electromagnetic fields within other. It's a matrix of lots of multi-layer electromagnetic fields within itself. It's a greater unified electromagnetic field, but within a matrix of many more sublayered fields of the same essence, of the same concept of electromagnetic frequency, light, etc. Because something that we already mentioned is the multiple bodies of the soul and the sublayers of different subtle bodies within the auric field. Like, for example, the vital body, the subtle body, the astral body, the mental body, the emotional body, all these different bodies within the soul, right? So when you are being explained about the auric field, you can see that there are different ratios, there are different proportions within these ratios of expression that emanates from the center of our body, of all of these sublayers, other sublayers of these auric fields within this concept of aura, right? And each of them is attributed to, of course, one specific either subtle body or field within the auric field, or expression of our own consciousness, etc. So, with this brief introduction, we can now understand the metaphysics, the solid base of the metaphysics behind the auric field and the chakra system. And we also got to the conclusion that, of course, the reason why we have these different vortex energies, chakras within our own chakra systems that are numerous across, the spine, is because we created this configuration based on the universal laws of consciousness that we also will go forward with in the future. I know that many of you might already be aware about the majority of them, that are related to as above so below, the laws of chaos and order, the law about the all that is and the one, and etc, etc, etc. So yeah, as I was saying, we got to this conclusion that there needs to be this chakra system and multi-layered, so that these different keys, these different expressions of the cell of our own consciousness can express a different attribute of our own awareness, of our own beingness, right? So that we can explore these archetypical aspects of our own nature by not being all conjoined, unified in one just expression of light, right? The same way that the light that we see, the light that we understand to be light, can differ into these multiple sublayers of the visible color spectrums of light. The same way that you see this archetypical construct, that every single reality, every single expression of consciousness, maybe an individual expression of consciousness or collective, or even the whole cosmos, the whole universe, or the ecosystem within a planet, has to have a, let's say, multi-layered expression of itself with different elements that create a bigger picture of how the system, how it works within a system, applies to this whole concept of the inner technologies of oneself I just want you to understand that example so that you understand that all of these elements are, let's say, divided, are, let's say, fractalized from the unified expression of itself, so that there is a system, there is a organized system that can function within all its element, within interactions, again, to create an awareness for life to be expressed and to create the bigger picture of this expression of life, this expression of a system. I'm just talking about a structure, right? The best analogy here, for that matter, was to explain to you why light has to, let's say, express within the universe, observable universe, into different vibrational frequencies as itself, different wavelengths, different vibrational frequencies that are oscillating in a higher or lower frequency. Well, this is the same idea that we were talking about with the whole idea of having a system, a segregated expression of our own auric field, which is electromagnetic field, which is light, in different sublayers and different chakra systems, vortex, which are vortex energy center points within the disposition of it across the body, so that there's a configuration, there's a system, there is an architectural construct that is created of it being represented in different sublayers, each of them representing a different archetypical aspect of beingness, of expression of beingness, of self, of consciousness. So that let us go forward into the concept and to the construct that these chakra systems are each of them expressing a different meaning, beingness behind awareness. And of course, all these different chakras are expressed in a different color of the spectrum of light. The first one is red, second, orange, third, yellow or golden, fourth, green, fifth, bluish turquoise, sixth is a kind of indigo, blue, royal blue indigo, and the seventh is violet or magenta. So as you can see, yes, this is the analogy of light, everything being light, but creating its sublayered expression and multiple, let's say, layered expressions of it within a spectrum of different versions of it, in which you can see, if you combine all of them, you have the ultimate unified version of light. So these different chakras are different expressions of beingness. And for that matter, we can, with the metaphysics, we can identify this system to be configuring these different expressions, these different ideas, these different meanings that are attached to these different expressions of beingness, as we shared before, such as, for example, the root being all about identity, all about, how you're rooted to your reality, also to the ground, let's say, the solar plexus being about creative energy, being about sexuality, being about this creation force and assigned to the genitals, and the solar plexus being about willpower, about decisions, about choice, about also the subconscious, that which is more subtle, and then the heart being about love, the throat being about communication, expression, the heart being about love, feelings, and also the solar plexus being much more about, let's say, sensations, about the gut feeling, about sensations from a more energetic sense. That's why it's connected, it's represented to the subtle body, it's is expression, it's connected to the subconscious mind. And then the heart chakra will be that of the feelings, that the feelings of these energies right within here, right, that there is to our own emotions. And the throat being about the expression, the communication, the third eye chakra being about psychic awareness, about perception, and thus linked to the directly to the pineal gland, which is all about psychicness, is all about perceptual nature. As it's not the same as the sensational concept within the solar plexus, because this It's more about the subtle, that which is sense. That's that which is more subtle, because there's not so much filtering, right, of the information that is expressed and that it is absorbed or that it is interacted with. It is much more of a sensorial expression or sensorial interaction with the energy surrounding you, with the energies expressing within, without, etc. And this concept, I want you to pay attention to what I'm deferring here, because this concept is very, very, very key to understand the whole point of this video farther into these dynamics, these metaphysical dynamics within the idea of control through the subconscious layers and also the simulation theory, reality, etc. And then, of course, we will have the crown chakra, which is universal consciousness, knowingness, right? So, as I was saying, the third eye is much more about psychic perception. It's about awareness. It's about psychic sight. Because when you are perceiving information, there is filtering within the psychic perception. And I mean filter in a way that the information received is much more, it's within the concept of or the construct of perceptual awareness. It's much more of a psychic, and within the psyche it's much more of a prefrontal cortex also discernment and integration. It's a more objective information. It's about the perceptual awareness, right? There is intellectual understanding behind, there is a mental process. That's why it's called psychic in a sense. There is much more the idea of the psyche, of the prefrontal cortex, of the perception being more of a mental, within the mental body, correct? And again, this is something that I will explain farther later, so that you all understand why it is such an important difference. And it's not the same to be controlling or to create an engineering through mind control on the psychic level, right, on the psychic let's say perceptual basis, let's say on a psychic perspective, than to do the targeting, which is the base of mind control, again the subconscious mind, in the subtle bodies, a targeting more the third chakra, because again it's connectedness within this archetypical construct of sublayers of bodies, chakras, consciousness, etc. It is that idea that the third is the connected to that which is the subtle mind, the subtle body. The It's much unfiltered, it's much more empathetic, it's much more sensational and much more energetic, empathetic, because it's all about much more of a flowing aspect of sensing, of meaningful ideas, meaningful concept, meaning that is attached or created or programmed, or constructs that are created, ideas, belief systems, etc., that are created but meant to be within the third, so that there is a subtle expression of it in the auric field. There is the subtle expression of it and sensation of it from a very empathetic way, from an empathic, energetic way that is subtle. So we have the sensation of that. We have the sensation of that, but we're not integrating it with the perception, the psychic perception. So we are more keen to just get it, right? We are just, it's a way that we are influenced by it. We are perceiving it. We are sensing it. We are, let's say, associating that idea, associating that sensation into our awareness in a way that we're not filtering it. We're not creating a mental process there, a specific, let's say, analytical observation of it, and there's not a cognitive analysis on it. It's the first part where we get the information. It's the first step, right? It's the first impression that we get from something. It's the first feeling, the first interpretation, the first step when we are in the process of creating an impression or in perceiving something and attaching meaning to it, or attaching, yes, conceptual meaning to it, because there is not filtering. It's much more energetically, it's much less filtered into something, or analyzed and filtered through your own belief systems, or through your own psyche, right? It is much less processed, let's say. And that is why remote viewers, for the majority of all the exercises that are executed in these practices, the first thing that they tell you is, do not try to guess psychically what you're seeing. Do not tell me it is this and this and that. Do not tell me it's this place and this location and this that, and there is this object and this person, and this is specific idea. Do not do that. Go to just plain sensations, feelings, ideas, in the less filtered way possible that you can imagine. Colors, feelings, sensations, textures, right? The senses are not compacted, the senses are not being filtered, and we absorb it as a sponge. That's why the subconscious is a part of it. That's why the subconscious is the mind that absorbs almost everything like a sponge. It's linked to that chakra. It is actually the chakra that is most targeted in mind control. And when you're trying to program something, because you're not filtering, it's absorbed like a sponge. So it does have an actual connectedness with the subconscious mind and the subtle body, the third chakra is specifically. But without jumping directly into this idea of the influence of mind control through the subconscious, and getting into the topic, into the video, which is how they control us through the simulation theory. This was a brief interaction of these inner technologies where I get to explain to you what do I mean with these inner technologies, so that you can proper understand that they play an important role in these targeting of these tools, these mind control tools, and knowledge on the different levels and sublayers of our own consciousness, to create processes of engineering on a larger scale, not just focusing on what people used to wrongly perceive, right? When we're talking about mind control, which is just the targeting of the mind, the brain, as if any other aspect of us was not a part of this. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm explaining, all these different metaphysical truths and theories, so that I can set up the base. So when we talk about inner technologies, when I will mention this word, you just have to understand that I'm referring to all these different concepts that I just described here: the chakra system, the different sublayers of the bodies, with all the different subtle bodies that exist, the multi-layered matrix of consciousness, etc., etc. They are but within a structural matrix, right? Within a system that is configured in different layers, in different systems, and different expression of beingness, but from different perspectives. We can talk about bodies, we can talk about chakra, key vortex energies, and for different conceptual natures and expressions of the self, or the being, the aspect of beingness, consciousness, or consciousness itself on the greater scale that is above all the different other structures, different systems, which will be the higher mind, the oversoul, the subconscious, the superconscious, the physical mind, etc., etc. And do not forget that what I just explained to you about the difference between how psychic awareness or the mind works in a different way in the third chakra, the solar plexus, and the third eye chakra, which is more of a psychic perceptual awareness. Do not forget that it's very important what I explained to you, so that you can understand farther the dynamics of mind control and the dynamics of MK Ultra, or control on a higher level, from this perspective of tweaking the subconscious mind and tweaking the self, the dynamics of the multidimensional self through these fractalization property, etc., and the subconscious scripting, etc., etc., because it's gonna play a very, very important factor, key element factor when I get to the very point of this video. So, yes, this was the brief metaphysical interaction so that we can finally get to the point on how the elite or these negative deep state groups utilize control to create forms of control and execute forms of manipulation within consciousness through the simulation theory, and not just control but engineering. And the word engineering will sometimes be even more heavy or more defining, because as you can see, control seems a little bit old fashioned when we are describing that they're not just trying to control is the generic construct, right, of what they're trying to do. But it's not just based on just controlling for the sake of controlling. That's a bigger, you know, um idea. But within that, behind that, being part of that, goes the idea of engineering. And that is why explaining the simulation theory, how they're using these tools and executing this knowledge through the simulation theory, that's why I need you to understand what I mean with the simulation theory and all that goes with that. Because they are not just through the practice of mind control, through the practice of mind influence or mind control or engineering of your own consciousness, there is not just the manipulation or the control or the engineering of your consciousness in the sense of what you see within, right, what it is within your consciousness, but what is projected outwards of your own consciousness, which is nothing else and nothing more than literally everything else. Literally your reality, your projected and manifested holographic reality that is nothing but a projection of the energy of your own consciousness, which is the whole point of why mind control is not just the influence on your isolated part of your consciousness, which we used to thought that it was the brain. First of all, we get out of the idea, the limited perception that it was just an isolated part of our consciousness, which is the mind, the brain. No, it's the entirety of the sublayer matrix of your consciousness. But it goes more than that. With the controlling techniques and the engineering techniques being used on that layer, on that greater layer, which is the whole purpose and the whole concept of mind control, we understand that they're not just affecting what is inside, but everything else that projects outside of you, because of the very universal law and conceptual statement, conceptual truth that is that every single thing that you experience, every single thing that you see around, your reality, your surrounding reality, is a projection of your own consciousness. So having got here, I think we got to the threshold point, which we can start the video already, or the concept and the title, the main point of subject of our own video here, which is how the elite utilizes the simulation theory to control you and even engineer you and or your reality, which yes, goes by the same hand. And for that, let's have another brief introduction, of course, for those of you who might need a little bit of a refreshing, let's say, overview on this conceptual truth of the universe, which is that we are the creators of our own reality. As you may already know, everything is energy, everything is consciousness, and there is nothing outside of all that exists that is not consciousness, right? You understand now that what we explained before about the light, everything being the same field and everything being the same expression of consciousness of all that is, having to fractalize itself into multiple expressions, infinite expressions of itself, so that it could make. This is the same idea behind everything that we observe is a projection of our own reality in the literal sense, in the most objective way, possibly that one can express it. Your surrounding reality, the physical objects, the ecosystem, the planet you're living in, your everything, your the people that you experience, the people that you are have create connections with on a spiritual level, on a interpersonal level, your communications with other consciousness, your direct experience and communication and exchange and co-creation with every single aspect of your own reality, maybe your the nature, maybe your planet, maybe your surrounding objects, your atmosphere, your the other human beings, the rest of the human beings, the rest of the beings like the animals, the plants, the crystals, right? The angels, the guides, the spiritual guides, the sun, the planets, like literally everything is a projection of your own consciousness. That is the universal truth that we already know about. So in this video, we're going to be focusing specifically on how we are creating our reality from the perspective of the dynamics of the four density consciousness, which, by the way, the four density consciousness is when we actually are integrating our own consciousness awareness. It is the integration of perception on all these dynamics of us as a creator of everything that's around us. It is the threshold point in which we are connecting the dots within awareness on how we are actually creating our reality dynamically in our day-to-day current focalized experience, in our expression of focalized awareness experience. So in a way, it's like, let's say that four density consciousness, among many other things that are archetypically representative of that state of evolution of consciousness layer, consciousness density, it's all about integrating the awareness of the dynamics of how we actually create our reality every single time, in every single now moment. We are reintegrating it in our perceptual consciousness. And that is when we are starting opening our eyes to a different perspective of nature that transcends what we call the Newtonian physics, that is more directly linked to the perception of time and space and reality, on how the universe works and the laws of the universe works from the third dimensional plane, which is much more still not within that layer of the quantum field, within that level of the quantum world. So there's a threshold point also where we are slightly moving away from that Newtonian physics perception from space and time and the laws of physics, and we are actually starting to tap into this field that it's not that recent anymore, but not that long ago, which is what we called quantum physics. Yes, it is the discovery of the idea of quantum mechanics. And with that, of course, goes the science of metaphysics, that, of course, within the scientific community is still not perceived to be an objective science. The science that we utilize, etc., is not able to yet, let's say, prove, like making evidence of consciousness being something that is not emanating from the brain. But it's another threshold point which we have to understand that consciousness is that fundamental element that sustain all of the explanations, all of the mechanics, dynamics of the quantum world. Welcome to awareness. Welcome to the awakening of your awareness. Welcome to the awakening on what reality is about. This is the threshold point where humans start to understand that reality is not an outside, isolated plane of existence from what's inside, from what it's to be perceived of consciousness or the observer. It's rather the understanding that everything outside of it, everything that exists, it's within the same plane of existence, within the same plane of expression of consciousness, because consciousness is that fundamental element where everything else emanates from and is projected from. It's that point where we understand, therefore, that reality is nothing but a holographic projection of our own consciousness. And we say holographic, of course, because of what we expressed before, that everything is light, everything is electromagnetic expression of light, everything is an electromagnetical field where there are perturbances, there are oscillations, different modulations of that field that creates the structural differences between subatomic layer, particular level, then the atomic layer, every single physical entity that we can describe in space and time, right? Every single thing. So it's holographic because it's projected from consciousness. It's a virtual kind of reality. It is what we shared before about the difference between material and physical. Everything is physical. Everything is physical. Everything is an expression of physical entities. May it be an object made of multiple atoms, made of multiple, like billions and billions of particles and subparticles, or maybe an atom on itself being made of also particles within itself, or particles being made of subparticles within themselves, you know what I mean? And we can go forward to then the theory of fields, which is something that I cover a lot, but let's not go off topic here and restrain a little bit for the continuation of the subject. So it is holographic in nature because it's a projection of consciousness, and consciousness, it's energy. Consciousness is energy. And at the same time, it holds all of the properties of a holographic projection of information. Besides being tangible to our own physical eyes, besides being things that we can touch, that we can hold, that we can interact with as dense objects, materialized objects, etc., we're talking about the fact that it's still a part of the simulation, and it's still a part of our own created reality from within consciousness. So, for that matter, yes, there are elements that are denser, that are harder to change from our own consciousness, because the way that we are projecting it, right, the way that we are creating them, it just holds a position where it's much less malleable, right? But we're not just focusing on the density of objects or the density of things. We're talking about the dynamics of consciousness within a perspective that is focusing more on the ideal, the world of the ideas, let's say the layer or the field of reality that works through meaning, that is added meaning, that it goes beyond the solid structure of what we are set to work with, right, in this specific experience. We're going back now a little bit with what we were explaining in our introduction, which is the inner technologies, the chakra system, explaining how there are different layers of expression of beingness, one being about beingness, the other about willpower, choices, communication. We're talking about the ego, about the personality construct, and most importantly, belief systems on the subconscious mind. Yes, we will be mentioning like crazy the idea of the subconscious mind, because it is literally that layer of the consciousness where control is said to happen, but not just control. It is that layer of consciousness where we are observing information like a sponge, and we are, let's say, expressing it back by manifesting them. We are manifest that easily from very easy dynamics and very automatic dynamics, I will say, for that matter, because it goes and it functions like everything with a law of 0 point energy. Everything always goes to a 0 point state of energy. We know this also within Newtonian physics. Like when we hold an object, when we are talking about potential energy within gravity, even though that's very old fashioned for the quantum world. That's very, very old fashioned for the quantum world. When we hold an object and we're talking about the idea, this is my microphone, so I cannot put it too far away. But when we're talking about the gravity potential energy within gravity, when we're holding an object and it has a potential to fall, right? So what it tends to do is fall. Or within the electrical theories, right? Within electric field theories, we know that there is an electrical potential, and the system is always going to tend to the 0 point state where the charges are, met at a certain point, or etc., etc. So that is what I'm trying to explain here with the subconscious, which is a very pretty fundamental part of the simulation theory dynamics, and the that's why you'll experience it, you will see that it's pretty much the basis of mind control, and thus why we are covering first of all a video on how they use the subconscious to control, and then we're connecting it to the simulation theory dynamics, because it's pretty much the same theme, the same concept, but there's just much more layers to it. It works, we're stepping into the understanding that if they control or they get to engineer, as we said before, the self and the friendly layer, mostly of the subconscious, they are not just altering yourself from a perspective of what happens inside, but also what happens directly to the projected reality outside that works within the simulation theory dynamics. So, parting from this base, of course, if they can access your consciousness, if they can create a form of engineering, a form of manipulation, a form of disassociation with the self, subconscious programming, mental programming, subconscious scripting, association, disassociations, creations of inner systems that we will talk about specifically in later videos. If they are using these greater self dynamics from the four density consciousness, they are affecting you and your entire reality. So we think this construct of the simulation theory, most importantly talking about the subconscious mind, we're getting to the point of this whole subject more specifically here, because we're going to be describing what are these four density dynamics that are the most important or relevant to how these control or this engineering, these mind control, how they're using these, let's say, information, these density consciousness dynamics and the simulation theory in order to perform these techniques of mind control. And so, parting for the point now that knowing that mind control does create a form of manipulation, control, and engineering also in your outside reality, the reality that surrounds you, because it's an holographic projection of your own consciousness. You now know that that's how effective mind control is. It's not just altering your mind inside, it's not just the psyche isolated, it's targeting the entirety of the dynamics of how you are manifesting your present reality and the interdimensional threads and connectedness that you may hold with other beings. First of all, we already mentioned that the fundamental element, the key point of mind control, is that idea of the subconscious mind. We went a little bit with the explanation of why on the last video, but we are going to go a little bit more specific within the dynamics, the metaphysical dynamics here, along with how it's related to the simulation theory. When we create our reality, when we are projecting our reality holographically, it's being directly manifested through the energy of our unconsciousness, and we know that. But furthermore, what defines the architecture, what defines the fundamental expression of this reality that you get to express is by simply adding meaning to it, because again, we share that consciousness is what creates reality. But consciousness, when we have template reality of everything that is existent as a, let's say, template level, expression as a blueprint, but the basis of what we get to experience, let's say for us in a human life, in a experience of an incarnation, right? What we call life itself holds a template level that is parting from the inner systems that we can call our own belief systems from the self, from our own consciousness. And not to go too off topic with the subject of video, let's go back to the temporary level of what can this reality offer to us, what can life on earth and in this specific life, in this body, etc., can offer to us. That's another form of defining that there's a template layer there. It's a template reality where we can experience the laws of earth in the way that they work, right? The different chakra systems in the way that is configured in this planet, and not just of this planet, but within our own bodies, because we are an extension of our own planetary consciousness, nature, etc., etc. So within that template layer, there is a collective consensus, but within the individual, we are creating our own construct reality. We are creating our own set of belief systems that is where we will be adding the meaning to how we perceive ourselves, either from the positive polarity or from the negative polarity, and thus creating these so-called belief systems or inner systems where there are expressions of our own self, of our own awareness within the dichotomy, of course, because we are experiencing right now through evolution the, let's say, the transition from polarity consciousness to unified consciousness. So that's why we have these polarity systems. That's why we have this dichotomy within consciousness that express, again, polarized belief system that add different meaning, and from, let's say, from the perspective of two different polarities in the spectrum of energy, in the spectrum of consciousness and energy, with a negative meaning added or a positive one. One is part of spectrum of the dichotomy based in fear, another part of the polarity based in love. In a more simplified way, your belief systems is what creates your apparent reality. Your belief systems is what defines what you get to experience in this simulation of life. So that will be the first layer where the elite is utilizing these tools for mind control on sabotaging or interfering or engineering the reality that you get to experience through the layer of the subconscious. It will be about engineering your own set of belief systems and trying to create negative belief systems about yourself that distorts that perception of the self and that perception, let's say, that disconnection and disharmony with your true self, so that they can interfere with you in a way that you get to manifest and create experiences that allows you to visualize that, to make it visible, to make it perceived through your own consciousness, through your own prefrontal cortex, and able to be understand on a mental level, so that you are your physical self, your physical mind is making itself, making that belief aware. So when you get to experience your, let's say, the set of manifested events or circumstances in your physical reality where you are pushed, where you are, let's say, magnetized into that specific subject or construct that represents your limiting or negative belief systems, you are able to make your physical self aware of it, and by integrating it, you can put it back to balance and to awareness, which is the dynamic, the physical law that we have explained so much many times, that everything always tends to go to a 0 point energy within every system. So you can see that's why it manifests It has to manifest for you to become aware of it. It goes from the above to the below layers, which is the physical reality, so that you are able to, let's say, make yourself aware of it, integrate it, and by integrating it, the system goes back to a 0 point energy. The system goes back to a point of balance, to a point of harmony. And this is the fundamental base where mind control takes place, because everything related to the self is about your set of belief systems. The ones that are in positive polarity are the ones who are telling the truth about who you truly are, and the ones who are in the negative polarity are the ones who are not in alignment with that truth of who you are. And it does have that, let's say, dynamic of really pushing you into these experiences where you have to integrate that aspect of yourself. You have to integrate that point. Nevertheless, this is a part of the simulation theory and the dynamics of consciousness that is not so much about what I came here to say when I mean the four density dynamics within the subconscious mind and within the simulation theory, which goes more a little bit into the quantum world also and into the quantum dynamics. And it's more focalized not just in your whole life as a being, but more focalized into what you get to experience in your day to day reality and how they use it. This means what they get to be very aware of is how to utilize, how to switch the orientation and behavioral patterns through action and through certain form of influence from the subconscious mind. And we're going to get just right there. In a way, it is true that the main focus and target of mind control, if it's utilized for a very specific individual level, if it's used to target specifically you as an individual or collected for a specific switching of mentality, connectedness to the self, to your expression of beingness, etc., self perception, etc., etc. Besides, even if the ultimate target will be able to engineer these belief systems, because again, if we go back and look to the idea of fractalization, what we talk about is that in the first iteration, in the first case of the, let's say, step of the whole process of mind control, there needs to be this fractalization property. There needs to be this harmony that is being created around the idea of the self, around the idea of the identity, the polarization of the consciousness, the adding into more disharmony and to more polarity within one's consciousness has a direct impact on the set of belief systems, which is how we get to give meaning to who we are, to the perception of the self, to the experience of the self on a fundamental basis. So yes, the first target point of mind control will be the belief systems and the distortion of the self to keep and to reinforce this fractalization property. So by adding this more polarity consciousness, by creating more disharmony and more distortion from the self, they are able to engineer the different sublayers of your consciousness. And most importantly, by keeping that fractalization property and adding more disharmony to the self, they are opening up the pathways to the subconscious, which is the main fundamental key element for control, which is what gives them the ability to allow them to switch you into a specific action on or orientation. And this goes back again into the law of 0 point. This goes back to the idea that every single system tends to a 0 point energy. The subconscious, for that matter, will be this key element. This whole dynamics that we explained before about how everything tends to go on a 0 point system by trying to reach again its point of integration, its point of balance and harmony, it's pretty much delve into the subconscious mind that, as we know, holds many different layers. And the threshold point to reach out to that point of integrity is the physical reality, because the physical mind, the ego, the prefrontal cortex needs to perceive it, first of all, create an integration of perception of it, and afterwards there is a whole cognitive analyzation. There's a lot of mental processes going on there. There's a lot of emotional processes going on there, even if there's emotion added to it. And there are lots of parts of consciousness who are focused into that is specific idea or belief that is manifested to reality. And there are multiple focuses on consciousness altogether. But nevertheless, as we shared before, we are talking about the fact that the subconscious has many different layers, deeper layers, layers that are not so unconscious. And in this mind, you can find belief systems, mental pattern, behavioral patterns, specific inner systems that within mind control, we will explain later on what it means. So the subconscious and the unconscious mind, for that matter, holds that dynamic within metaphysics or within how energy flows and how through consciousness. It has a potential energy, let's say, and for that matter, that potential energy creates a push to consciousness to get to manifest that, or to get to switch the orientation of that consciousness into that direction, into that specific idea, because it means to make itself aware. And so that specific dynamic that is very defining of the subconscious mind. It is the reason why we say that the subconscious mind is the one that is the responsible for the most immediate manifestation of our own reality, not only through the layer of subconscious, the belief systems. The layers of the belief systems are the how you interpret yourself to be, how you perceive your own self, but also different mental patterns, behavioral patterns, other forms of expression of awareness that are found in there that define many of the different actions and experiences and even behaviors or ideas that we get sometimes, even that we are not aware, that doesn't come directly from our own awareness, right? It doesn't emanate from there. It's not the source, it's not the direct source, but get to have that very subtle but very powerful effect on us on a daily basis. But that dynamic, it's not the only reason why the subconscious is so much powerful and so much influential in the creation of our own reality, but rather is also the idea that it doesn't have the filter of the conscious mind. It doesn't have the filter of the prefrontal cortex, of the ego, of the focalized cognitive aware mind within the physical plane. So that's why it's more powerful, because it's more subtle, because it's not filtered, because it's more energetic, it's not compressed, it's not focalized directly into something, it's not compacted, it's not filtered. There is no resistance that is being created in that system that's added from the conscious mind, from the ego mind, from the prefrontal cortex. Because when you are actually creating or manifesting from a more conscious perspective, there are multiple elements of your sublayer multidimensional consciousness that play a part in here, of course. And depending on how much more percentage of the higher mind there is to it, there is much or lesser resistance also. But on itself, generically within the dynamics of the manifestation of from the subconscious awareness, you are creating from a conscious perspective, from awareness directly. And the dynamics on itself, for that matter, are much different because it is no longer a non-filtered form of manifestation, but the filtering that the conscious mind can do can either add resistance or project the manifestation in a focalized way. When you're creating from conscious awareness, you are creating from a dynamic in which there is the energy of your consciousness flowing in a focalized perspective and dynamic. So, for that matter, in the process, in the cycle of manifestation and creation, there are multiple elements, there is a different set of oscillatory networks within your brainwaves that are set to manifest those specific ideas or that specific energy in a way that it takes more of a focalization, it takes more of a focus energy and a channel, a pathway that is more harmonic, that is more centered, that is at the same time creating a stable bridge or a stable pathway where the energy can flow dynamically instead of resistant. So you are also manifesting, but there is a whole mental process, there's a whole conscious process there where the energy flows different in the way that is manifesting itself. In a way, it's not that there is much more consciousness being projected or being expressed through the conscious or through the subconscious mind. There can be as much amount of awareness and energy being projected and expressed through both of these different minds. The difference lies simply in the fact that within the subconscious mind, there is just not the idea of filtering, which adds resistance to the way that the energy flows inside that system, which is different from the conscious mind, where there is a filtering of the energy that is being expressed, that is being projected, because there are much more mental processes, much more conscious processes happening on the background, of course, in the way that we are interpreting the energy of consciousness, in the way that we are interpreting the awareness behind. But if the system is projected and is created in a way in which there is the pathway for its expression, it's flowing without resistance because it's coming from a belief that is set up in a positive spectrum, where there is the idea being embedded that there is true embodiment of this belief that supports that energy that is flowing into the manifestational process. If the energy that is being expressed from the subconscious mind is set from a balance point of intention, if it's coming also from a belief that is vibrating within true support of the ideas and the energy that is expressed from the consciousness into that manifestational process, and there is the belief on itself altogether that it can be manifested, and the way in which it is focalized and in which the energy and the awareness is being projected is not creating resistance, but rather allowing the pathway and the system to let that energy of that consciousness flow into that direction, then the manifestational process is not affected necessarily by the filter of the conscious mind. So it's not a handicap on itself. It's just the idea that there has to be a very well designed and very harmonic pathway for it to manifest without the added resistance that the filter of the conscious mind can create for it. So, in a way, we're talking about the same consciousness, the same beingness, the same consciousness altogether, because again, there is not the idea of the separation of the different minds. We already talked about that, how it's intersected and how it's the same conscious awareness altogether. But these different layers of the different minds, the subconscious, the conscious, etc., the superconscious, are just, let's say, expression the consciousness within the awareness of the individual in different expressions of the dynamics of energy. In other words, the way in which consciousness is interacting with itself, the way in which we are processing the information and processing the energy of our own consciousness is happening at different levels, and it's also interacting in different dynamics and expressing in different dynamics, different pathways. So for that matter, the oscillatory networks that works for the manifestational process or the processing of the information, the projection of the consciousness of the conscious mind, needs to set up a very specific brainwave configuration in which the focalization for the matter needs to be more in tune or more refined, let's say, but altogether it's more focalized, let's say. It's more fixed to a specific direction, to a specific focus, right? It's much more defined in that way. So the cycles of creation and the cycles of manifestation, they are also malleable, but not much dispersed around, not much. They are more focalized, they are more filtered and not necessary to create resistance in case, again, there is not a negative belief system or that there is conflict within the conscious mind creating pathways, like let's say influencing the pathways in which it gets to manifest. But again, it's true that it's more focalized, and for that matter it takes a different dynamic altogether and a different route, a different movement, right, within consciousness, and a different set and configuration altogether of oscillatory networks within brainwaves configurations. There is much more prefrontal cortex that is tuning and refining the way that we are focalizing that specific flow of energy, that specific expression of awareness, right? That's also why it needs to be very refined, and it needs to be created, the whole pathway, in a way that we are not adding resistance, right? But in the sense of the subconscious, that altogether has different layers of unconsciousness, meaning that there are deeper layers of expression of our consciousness that is less aware to our own perception, that are less within the integration of perception, let's say. In a way, the expression of the subconscious mind, the way in that the energy of consciousness, conscious awareness is expressed there, is a way in which there is not much more of the idea of a filtering. There is no filter of the conscious mind, of the prefrontal cortex. There is no harsh analysis and conscious analysis, and not just that, but also there is no resistance that is created in the pathways for them to express. So by not adding resistance, the information that is flowing in itself and it's being processed within itself flows much more easily and without less resistance, and it's also much more, let's say, malleable, because it's not being filtered, it's not even organized or consolidated into solid structures. That it doesn't mean that it's fully dispersed, I just mean to say that it's less condensed into specific constructs that are coming from the awareness, interpreting the whole flow of consciousness, flow of information, and let's say analyzing, adding it meaning, transforming it, creating all forms of iterations in the process, and obviously vibrates on different wavelengths of within the, let's say, configurations of oscillatory networks, as we already discussed with the idea of brainwaves. So the configuration in how the subconscious, the information of the subconscious mind flows directly into manifestation is a path of much more less resistance than the idea of any information that comes out of the conscious awareness of the more of the physical mind perspective, of the physical mind. But a very important key element here to let clear so that we do not take on misunderstandings is that when we define the idea of the conscious mind, we're not just saying that the information or the ideas that are being held or expressed within the subconscious mind are not conscious awareness. We're not saying or trying to define them as non awareness or non consciousness, right? Although it's very tricky because, again, we're talking about unconscious, right? I understand the trickiness here, of course. We understand the trickiness here, but we have to remember that when we mean conscious mind, we're mostly focusing on the idea of being aware to the physical self, to the construct personality construct, to the focalized expression of our consciousness that is living here and now, the experience and the expression of conscious awareness. So it's a matter of just defining what is more integrated within perception, right? That information that is much more going on from the perception of the prefrontal cortex, from the perception of the lower fractal self. So we are not saying that the subconscious is information that is just flying out around by itself. Of course, no. Everything that exists within our consciousness is conscious awareness. It is conscious awareness. It's just that that which is subconscious is unconscious to the lower fractal self, to the prefrontal cortex, to the reintegration of perception, to the perception, to the awareness that is perceived within the, again, the focalized experience, the expression of our own reality and in expression of consciousness here and now, right? And of course, within these different minds, we have different combinations and configurations that are also defined by the various different sets of oscillatory networks within brain waves that will set up the specific tune, the specific, let's say, configuration of percentages of these different minds taken into the process of how you are creating your physical reality and how you are conducting the flow and the continuation of consciousness, let's say the evolution and the expression of your own consciousness. That on itself, they are working in different sets of cycles of energy, that different harmonics, let's say, that creates a overlay of different cycles of energy, different oscillations within brainwaves, within mental expression of different sublayers of your consciousness that conducts and flows the energy within the manifestational properties in a different way. For example, when there is a combination of the subconscious, the conscious mind, and the higher self, there is this phenomena that we can call the synchronicity phenomena. And that is where you will be in your simulational field reality. You will be walking by in your own neighborhood or whatever place may be, and you will see a symbol, or you will see a word, or you'll see something that reminds you of something that you are going through within, that is very significant, that there is meaning added to it, that has to do a lot of symbological representation with something that you're experiencing or you're going through in your own consciousness, that might work as a form of guidance or message from other guides, or even, let's say, confirmations that you are in the right path and you are aligning with that specific energy property, with that specific meaning, idea, concept, etc. Or it could be just simply the idea that you get to a place or a bar or a cafeteria where you suddenly decide to not go, to stay a little bit more, like 5 minutes more. And because you decided to stay those 5 more minutes, you met somebody that it was meaningful for you because they offer you a job, a career, or something that you are interested in. Or suddenly you meet, in the subway, you're in the train or you're in the subway, and you um, missed the other train and you get in the new one, and you meet somebody of your past that you were thinking of, and that you get to meet again, and they tell you something specific that is very relevant, that is very synchronistic with the things that you were going through, or something that you needed to know in order to continue, etc. So there are many examples to this idea of the synchronicity phenomena, and there are many different reasons for why it gets to happen. It may be a message with your from your own guides, from your higher mind. It might be that reality is showing you that you are pretty much in synchrony with that which you are, let's say, discussing within, that you are going through within, or that somebody is interacting with any of these higher frequency layers of your consciousness, higher fractal layers of your own conscious mind that are in tune with the properties of the wavelengths, of the oscillations, of the cycles of manifestation of the dynamics of the fourth density consciousness, which is exactly what we come here to say in relationship to how the lead utilizes these as a form of mind control and as a form of influence. Because the way in which, for its own, let's say, essence, the way in which synchronicity manifests is always because you get to synchronize and harmonize with higher fractal layers of your consciousness that are either from the subconscious mind, that are tuning either in the subconscious mind, into the higher mind, into the superconscious mind, or into higher fractal consciousness beings like your guides, like your own higher mind, like your own spirit connections or entities, or that you're pretty synchronized with a higher fractal consciousness of your own beingness that is vibrating or that is oscillating already within this four density consciousness, that is more integrated within the perception and the construct of space and time, that is more integrated into the perception of the idea that you are the creator of your own reality. That manifestational quality is much less resistant, and it's much more, it's enhanced, it's much more efficient, because there is harmonization with the higher fractal consciousness, where there is an integration of perception that you are the creation of your own reality. You are connecting those dots. It is this threshold that we already talked about before when describing this four density consciousness layer, this four density level of evolution of awareness and consciousness. Because you're tapping into those harmonics, into that frequency of conscious awareness, where there is that threshold point in which you're jumping already into, you're opening up to the quantum aspect of reality. You're understanding that is a expression of your own consciousness. When you are connecting the bridges of the below and the above, where you understand that all is interconnected and you integrate the perception of that awareness that once was lost, right? In that threshold point also, where you understand the quantum nature and the quantum mechanics, the quantum phenomena, everything, absolutely every other element else falls into place from that fundamental universal truth, that fundamental base awareness of oneself and reality, which is the quantum mechanics, metaphysics that are part of these quantum fields, right? These quantum sciences, the quantum dynamics. It's that threshold point that transcends the awareness into a fourth density dynamic, because you are now in tune, you're now integrated back again with that layer, that higher fractal layer of consciousness that is and has always been operating in those quantum dynamics. But you're now just becoming aware of it. You're now just integrating it within your own perception. So it's not that you were not using this four density quantum mechanics of manifestation. You were always, and every consciousness is always functioning in those dynamics. But now when you make that point of integration of awareness into that, you are now becoming just aware of those dynamics, of those mechanics. So you start to have a direct relationship and to have a direct experience, exploration of your own consciousness, in a way that you're no longer letting be a process that goes unaware about yourself, but you're rather taking the control of it. You're just becoming aware of it, and thus you're also learning how to function in a way that you are learning to refocalize, to take awareness of how you're actually manifesting, because there's nobody else who is doing it for you. It is your own consciousness. So you're just now, by making yourself aware, you are learning how to utilize those properties and how to function within those dynamics, within the dynamics of the quantum world. And to continue the subject of video, we also are going to need to remember that for a vibration and idea and expression of consciousness to have a manifestational potential and eventually have the possibility of manifesting your reality, it is not just the conscious awareness being focalized, maybe from a more conscious or unconscious perspective dynamic of your own self saying, I want to manifest it, or something else pulling it from just oneself, but something being pulled by just one's self, individual consciousness. But also, we're going to have to add here the idea of the interdimensional threads and connections within the matrix of the subconscious collective of humanity, the collective awareness of the planet, maybe within your own species, or even other species, other entities that are not necessarily from your own species, from your same race, taking also a part in these dynamics of manifestational qualities and properties and the discussion of information there, because specifically in this context of mind control, the information that is placed in there and the information that is also pulled and takes a role into these practices are not emanating from yourself, and they're not being pulled by your own intentional self, right? It's not that you want to manifest the subconscious programming, the subconscious scripting. You're not the one creating the direction, the action orientation for something to go into this specific way or that a specific other way, etc. We are talking about mind control. So there is the intrinsic idea of other consciousness, other beings trying to create this form of manifestational events or circumstances, being pulled and being programmed, first of all, being scripted, and then being, let's say, pulled into your own reality. And in this case, we have to remember the law of attraction. We have to understand that we live in a magnetic electrical universe. Everything is electromagnetic field. Everything within consciousness is charged, may it be positive or negative. Everything has a charge within polarity consciousness, within duality consciousness. So within your own field, within your own auric field, there are things that, because they're negatively charged, they attract, that which is in symphony with that charge, with that also the essence, the meaning of that concept, that construct within consciousness. And so it be with the positive ones. So we have to remember those dynamics about the pull and back, dynamics, the attraction and repulsion dynamics that inherently goes with the science or the metaphysics of consciousness, of the law of attraction, that creates these dynamics by their own metaphysical nature, by their own charge within consciousness, how they are magnetizing or repulsing something. And of course, there are much more dynamics that are used for the practice of mind control, such as the whole idea of how the programming is specifically is conducted, the creation of inner systems, all these different forms of association, dissociation, etc. That goes with the series of mind control that obviously we're not going to cover in this video because that's point of conversation for upcoming videos on this series. But in this video, where the subject is is focused how the elite utilizes the simulation theory specifically to control, and not just necessarily specifically focalized for mind control individuals, but also within their own reality and to manifest their own specific desires, and even, yes, also control on a collective level, as we already shared before. Another element that we will have to add here within the construct of the four density consciousness is that all these different, not just phenomena, but technologies are able to experience by consciousness because and utilized by groups of consciousness, because in this threshold point, by understanding the nature of quantum mechanics and quantum dynamics, there is the access to these different technologies that are used in the so-called secret space program, that they are used by different intelligence agencies, different occult groups, etc., that are not just that one consciousness can only access, discover, or understand and utilize and co-create with if they are operating from a minimal percentage of fractal consciousness that is within the dynamics of the four density consciousness, because this technologies operates within the quantum field, within the quantum dynamics, and most importantly, it taps into the layers, multidimensional layers of consciousness that are higher. So by itself, metaphysics is also something that needs to be understood and integrated as a part of the whole co-creation. And otherwise, if you do not understand the basis of metaphysics, if you do not understand the quantum world, if you do not understand consciousness as the fundamental element of reality, if you don't understand consciousness as the fundamental element of the dynamics of physics, right? And you do not understand quantum mechanics, the world of quantum mechanics, then you're not able to interact directly or to know how these technologies work because they are based on quantum mechanics again. So that's the threshold point where humans are only able to discard these technologies by entering into the minimal amount of fractal consciousness for the four density consciousness. That's where we find quantum computing. Now, that's the whole idea of being aware now and being able to tap into quantum computing programming, for example, or quantum entanglement used in technologies for abductions, for example, or wave particle duality theory being understood now because we're talking about the holographic nature of reality, the multidimensional aspects of reality, direct targeted weaponry being able to affect brain waves that mind control technology, scalar weapon technology, um, cloning, medbeds, etc. All these different technologies, even age regressive technologies, can only exist and be discovered within the threshold point of the four density consciousness because you are introduced into the mechanics of quantum dynamics. And this obviously opens up a whole rabbit hole of ideas and pathways of exploration of all these different topics that I want to share with you guys, which is this is specific technologies, how they work, how they function, basically based on these quantum mechanics, all these different alien technologies, all these different elite technologies, secret space program technologies, and also how not these quantum mechanics theories being explained for you, because as you may know, I'm a physics student. So I have both the studies of physics and the studies of metaphysics on my channeling abilities and my download, and my own experience in the space program, and my own contact experiences with higher fractal consciousness as a perfect way to explain to you in a very specific and much more defined way how they operate. But again, that was the topic for other videos and subjects. So, as you may already have intuited, these technologies that came to these groups of elitists or deep states or space program peoples, intelligence agencies, whatever, it's not that it was discovered, nevertheless. They were rather given by higher density consciousness, extraterrestrial consciousness, interdimensional beings that are already transpassed that threshold point much long ago and are already aware of these technologies and how they work and how to utilize them, and were given to us before we culminated into that threshold point by ourselves to assure that there will be a control on the collective's access to these technologies. And of course, that goes on itself with the consensus, and that's again another topic for the other conversation, other YouTube video. So just observe by yourself how far we've gone, and that is only the technology that they are showing us and that they are making public. But all these different technologies, the mind control technologies, the secret space program technologies, the anti-gravity, etc. These are technologies that were given to specific groups of mankind during World War II. Another subject for another conversation. But yeah, you may have already know about how the Germans were in contact with certain beings that gave them the anti-gravity technologies and the MK Ultra technologies too, and how the US in another part, in another side, they were also given in a way, the access to these technologies because something happened, certain Roswell incident happened, etc. Da 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 da. In a way, it was all planned on a major scale, and they were given it to them for a specific thing, for a specific purpose that I will discuss, yes, farther on other videos. So in a way, let's just get to the point, right, that yes, these entities have these access to these technologies, and with these technologies, these MK Ultra targeting, MyLab abduction and scenario technologies, there is one of the most important devices or technologies that we need to discuss for these subjects for this video, which is the brain implant or the psychic etheric implants, which enables the communication directly. Voice to skull communication is part of it, but it's not the only one that goes into this theory. Enables the communication of these beings directly to your brain, and not necessarily just your brain. Remember that the brain is like the computer of your own simulation theory. It's like the enabler, the programmer of all these different sublayers of your own consciousness altogether, that none of them are separated in different planes of existence just because they are of higher or lower density frequency, higher or lower fractal consciousness. Even though they find themselves in different vibrational frequencies, your brain, your physical, material, biological brain, is directly connected to all this. And that's why we talk about that brainwaves, these oscillatory networks, are expressing different configurations depending on how much percentages there are of each of one of these layers: subconscious, superconscious, conscious self, ego, higher self, etc., etc., etc. So they can perform the engineering through these brain implants. And not only that, but because some of them are found not just as etheric or psychic implants, but much more attached to the biological expression of us, let's say the physical brain, we can find them implanted to us in different scenarios of abductions within, maybe in the dumps, in the facilities known as deep underground military bases, or on a spacecraft like in the secret space program, the Dark Fleet. All of them creates different neural pathways, neural networks, and all of them affect the brain waves. All of them interfere with the electromagnetic expression of the psyche and the minds and the different sublayers of the mind, the brain waves. The most primordial use that is used for, it's not talking to your brain, it's not necessarily voice to skull communication. That, by the way, voice to skull communication does not need necessarily a brain implant. But the primordial use is to access and to tap directly into your own subconscious mind. to use it to affect and to influence directly these, let's say, simulation theory dynamics that we are expressing and we are describing in this video. So, yes, in this case, the brain implant's main primordial use is to not just track you, but to directly affect the brainwave systems, the brainwave oscillatory networks of your mind, of your consciousness, to create subconscious programming, subconscious scripting, subconscious mind control. But not just that, also target the specific configurations of manifestation of information that we expressed before, the manifestation of conscious awareness, of ideas, of energy that we expressed before, that are specifically found in certain harmonics, in certain configured overlapping cycles of energy of the different sublayer minds, and also the different brainwaves, oscillatory networks that can create different forms of manifestational consciousness being expressed in your physical reality, in your simulation, in your simulated holographic reality through these various quantum dynamics that we already expressed before of this four density consciousness density. And let's upscale this further. For a subject to be subconsciously programmed, neurolinguistic program, or subconscious scripting, the subject needs to receive its stimulus, it needs to receive information, it needs to receive a form of programming that is actually viable, that can be programmed within the subconscious. It has to be viable, it has to have an ability to be imprinted, to be implemented in the subject. But if the subject is thousands of miles away and it's living in their own life just like you and me, and it's not in a military underground base, or it's not in the secret space program spacecraft, or it's not in any other physical place where we can force them to go through certain experiences, be sat in chairs and put screens in front of them and sounds and force them to see specific forms of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, in a screen or in front of them, or through sounds are programmed, etc., words, experiments within intelligent agencies. How are we able to keep the subject programmed? How are we able to keep the dynamic of the subject continuously going under programming? Well, what better screen there is to a subject but nothing else and nothing more than their own reality in front of their own eyes, their own life, their own reality, their own simulated holographic reality, their day-to-day life in front of them. Sound, image, sensations, scents, smells, this, that. People talking to them, entities, experiences going on, circumstances, anything you can imagine. Because reality is the biggest screen, reality is the biggest programmable matrix that there is to exist, and therefore it is the biggest screen which with we can program the subject the better way, the most efficient way, and in a more continuated way. And that is the specific point of this subject on how the elite utilizes the simulation theory for mind control. So, yes, your surrounding reality, your holographic matrix reality that is created as a projection of your own consciousness, is what they are using to create the form of subconscious programming and the form of even neurolinguistic programming and creations of what we call the internal inner systems, which is something that it's pretty much related to the specific form of MK Ultra properties that generate a specific association, like a neural network, with that comprehends on itself a lot of different concepts, ideas, words, symbols, information altogether, even scents or colors or concepts, anything you can imagine, anything that is information, every single form of data within what it's called these neural networks that they create, starting from a point and evolving farther and farther into the creation of these so-called inner systems. But to understand further how they are able to get to that level, we need first to understand and recompilate a little bit the dynamics of the manifestation of the subconscious mind and how they get to use the simulation theory dynamics in order to manifest the symbols, the words, the constructs, the circumstances, or the events, or even encounters with certain specific people that they desire for the subject that is targeted for control in order to be able to get this at a practice. We already expressed and explained that the subconscious potential to manifest direct awareness or information that it's within itself has a lot much less resistance than anything that is within the comprehended conscious mind, just because there's no actual cognitive processes or filtering of information, and therefore the wavelength in which the conscious mind is vibrating and in which the information gets to have the potential for manifestation, the quantum jump for that actual manifestation into the surrounding reality, it takes less resistance and it's much easier to just present and manifest within your current holographic reality. So for that matter, we repeat this saying, which is energy always takes the path of least resistance. And you can see pretty much that in the subconscious mind. And much more important here, within the construct of mind control, there is a manifestational property that takes a lot of the, let's say, intensity, or let's say the potential for these forms of manifestation from the subconscious, which is that if within the subconscious there is the programming or the, let's say, the programming script of something that goes with an indication within the vibration of an order, within the vibration of, let's say, a direction that action needs to take into manifestation, and it's not filtered, right? There's no resistance there, then the energy moves into that specific direction because it's the order, it's the, let's say, the consciousness that goes with that specific program, idea, or concept. Within itself, the base itself of what it is within consciousness, it's an order, it's an indication. It's programmed to be an action, to be directed, to take a specific direction, and to collapse into manifestation. Because that is how they direct themselves when they are using these brain implants or they are using these forms of mind control, like booster school mind control technologies within the simulation theory. So for that matter, given an input, creating an input within the programmable brain that creates and projects your reality, the mind that manifests your surrounding holographic reality, the less affecting or the less, let's say, relevant elements or actions or programming ideas that they want to manifest in your reality and present in front of you, the actions or inputs that they create that are less relevant or create less effect in your direct personal life, let's say, or current experience, are much easier for that matter to manifest for them, because of the whole filtering thing that we were mentioning about when it comes to the idea of the resistance factors not being just the conscious mind itself, but also other layers like subconscious belief or karmic factors, attributes, or all those different elements that either amplifies or reduces the quantum probability for that it has to manifest. And this is something that was needed to explain for you to know what we mean when they are trying to calculate how much of a higher or lower probability for manifesting something can hold as a potential that they can see and they can perceive from these technologies. And so for that matter, we will go later into what specific other technologies and let's say assistants they use to calculate these and to be able to observe what they can actually do and what they cannot do with lesser probability, more probability, etc., etc. But you need to understand why I mentioned the different kinds of filter that consciousness can express, that consciousness can hold on to either amplify or reduce the possibility for something to manifest or not. So for that matter, the simulation theory dynamics of this four density of consciousness that they use through mind control are used for multiple purposes. Some of them are created to, as I said before, manifest a scenario in front of you that holds the symbols or the concepts, the words, the ideas that are pretty fundamental, symbological, and conceptual in nature for what it's called neurolinguistic programming or subconscious programming, or even the subconscious mind programming in the dynamics of the use of synchronicity, what I call non-organic synchronicity, that I will explain to you further. To give a little bit of input, like non-organic synchronicity will be that which is not natural, that which they have created artificially with these forms of mind-altering technologies, these targeted mind control weaponries where they intercept, the brainwave mechanics of the subconscious, and they can get through it and create the process of synchronicity, the phenomena of synchronicity artificially with these technologies, with these mind control technologies, that if they repeat in several, let's say, cycles of time, several repetitions within continuous synchronicity of those symbols, those words, those concepts, they are also using it as a form of ritual, right? Because a ritual is just the repetition of things. It doesn't need to be, a ceremony, right, of different, I don't know. A ritual is a repetition of things, something that is ritualistic. So if they combine the synchronicity with the ritualistic use of it, at the end of the day, it's like they are performing a ritual of repetition of words, symbols, and that which is repeated, that which is repeated and repeated and repeated within cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles of repetition, that itself, it's a concept of programming too. That which is repeated, that which is reinforced, it's created as a form of programming. It is the fundamental base of programming. But there are other uses in which they use the simulation theory dynamics for mind control or for control that are not just for manifesting things ahead of you, where they are trying to create these forms of subconscious programming or neurolinguistic programming, but also the manifestations of events for you in a way that you get to experience something that they want you to go through for whatever purpose that we're going to be explaining also further. And that also utilizes the same dynamics of the subconscious mind immediately manifesting into the physical reality with no resistance, or the engineering, let's say, of the synchronicity phenomena The use of non-organic, artificially produced synchronicity phenomena, in which they understand the dynamics of the brainwaves configurations, a set of brainwave oscillatory networks that are the specific configuration again to synchronize, to manifest instantly a symbol or a word or something, in perfect synchrony with your current reality. That at the end of the day is not so much the idea of just synchronizing with your external reality, it's also a manifestational property in a way, because you create your external reality. So let's say that the concept of synchronicity, it is much more also with the idea of synchronizing with that which is in a higher fractal consciousness layer, that which is either in the higher mind, the superconscious mind, or the subconscious mind, right? That is oscillating at higher vibrations at the physical filtered mind, right? That which is the dynamics of the physical mind that are of a lesser, let's say, or of lower sublayer within the matrix of consciousness layers, right? So it's not so much that conscious awareness, by the way, it's lower in frequency. When we say lower and higher fractal, by the way, we're talking about mostly also where they are found within the sublayer matrix of consciousness when it comes to hierarchy. It's a hierarchical form of defining their expression, and it's a form of, let's say, defining the tires, right? The level of relevance to the or a specific way that they are layered in a scale, right? From below to above, right? Consciousness is consciousness. It's not just held within one fractal, another and another, right? We share that they intersect, right? So let's go with the example of how they use this non-organic synchronicity first, and then let's jump into how they use this whole concept for further actions. So going with this concept of the non-organic synchronicity, we already understand that what they get to utilize is the technologies that they can target directly the emission of specific brainwave configurations that are in tune with the subconscious mind, from in which they can make you harmonize with that specific concept that they are projecting into your subconscious mind, and therefore create potential manifestational energy within that and make it collapse into your holographic matrix reality. Let's remember that they can tune into, they can, through these targeted weaponry, through these mind control technologies and the psychic brain implants that they put in subjects, they can alter the specific set of brain waves. They can make your brain be tuning and the specific brainwave system or configuration that is needed to access that subconscious mind and introduce the information through these technologies, through this implant, into that subconscious mind. And because it's vibrating in the same wavelength, in the same network of brainwaves, it does manifest and collapse within its potential energy. And because it's held in the subconscious mind, again, they are able to, at the same time that they program and they create the input, they also tune your own brain into that wavelength so that it ultimately manifests at the same time. Sometimes it might take more or less, or sometimes it might be more possible or less possible, based on the filters that we already commented before, that are all these different layers of resistance, of possible resistance that these manifestational properties, qualities, potential might encounter. When we talk about this point and we go through over it, we're going to go through two different examples to explore and understand that within this performance of these specific actions, these specific practices of the creation of non-organic synchronicity or manifestation, qualities engineering within mind control, within these dynamics of the subconscious, and these that are within four density dynamics, quantum dynamics, mechanics, etc. of higher fractal consciousness. We are talking about the spectrum of quantum possibilities, probabilities, dichotomized into those who are more probabilistic in nature or those who are less probabilistic in nature and has less percentages or possibility for manifesting in front of you or in your reality. And so, yes, we're talking about different percentages of potential for manifestational qualities, right? And we are going to explain this by giving two examples and explaining that when there are experiences that take a lot of, let's say, relevancy within your own consciousness, which, are affecting your life or are implicating a lot of meaning to it or a lot of other factors to it, we understand by nature that the filtering factors that we already discussed that could potentially create resistance for something to manifest, may it be belief systems or may it be certain energetic processes from within consciousness that need to be done in order for that to happen, or certain energetics that are not placed in that specific balance, or the fact that it's just not coming from a belief that is in tune with, or let's say supporting the idea that is to manifest, right, and creating thus a pathway for it that is much more dynamic. Then we can understand that there is much more resistance and there is much less probability or possibility in nature to manifest something in your reality. We understand that that is a factor that can imply a little bit less of probabilities for manifesting, that there is less percentage of possibility or probabilities of quantum manifestation in the physical reality, as well as the idea on the factor of a co-creation with other multiple consciousness, as that implies that those other consciousness need to be, let's say, in the same predisposition to be in a place where they also have or want to create or manifest that co-created experience for them. And there needs to be a lot of, again, all of the alignments with all the different factors that we explained before of why something might have to manifest or not. Not everything has to be very meaningful, but again, all these factors play a role, as we understand. So we can say that the more complex the manifestational or co-creational process within your own reality, if we look at through the first factor, it will all involve with the alignment of all these different aspects of our own consciousness, harmonizing and aligning themselves so that there is a clean pathway for that idea or concept or expression to manifest in front of us, right? To not create the resistance filters, to not create that hold of that energy, right? And to let it flow into that manifestational process. But if we look at it from the second factor perspective, where we are talking about the co-creational factor, the idea of having to involve other consciousness in the co-creation of that event, that is scenario, then the complexity and the manifestational potential for that will be much more leaning in having to synchronize with those other consciousness into all of them in whatever system, which whatever belief, which whatever purpose, which whatever intention might happen from whatever aspect of their own consciousness or source, having the same predisposition as you to manifest the same event that you're all being and taking part into co-creation. Within the eyes of you as an experiencer of your own reality, the need to co-create with other entities for something that you need or want to manifest is not a factor of, let's say, necessarily resistance or, let's say, complexity. It is complexity, but not difficulty. Complexity is not the same word and it's not the same concept, right? It's more complex because there's more layers to it. It's a co-creation, right? And there are other elements that play a role in here. There are other entities that that are co-created and intersect into the same experience. But that there is more complexity does not mean that there is more resistance or difficulty, right? For you as a creator of your own reality, if you're just aligned with whatever that you want to manifest or that has to manifest, it just clicks, no matter what needs to be orchestrated, right? Because again, everything, your reality, everything, even the people that you are intersecting realities with, it's a projection of the energy of your own consciousness. So you eventually will manifest that reality, right? But from the isolat perspective of the programmer, of the targeting dynamics, where there is an element of needing to calculate the different possibilities and probabilities for them to be able to make the process happen easier with less resistance, and mostly because we're talking about momentum, where if it's from a layer of control and they want to manifest something, there is always a reason for why it has to happen in that specific timing, or in which way it has to happen, or what specific needs to be a fundamental element to manifest, etc. So because it's from a controlling layer, let's say that we can definitely think of these as different probabilities of complexity that does play a role in, let's say, their ability to co-create something for you in your own reality from this layer of, or this construct of control, right? Of non-organic synchronicity or engineered simulation theory dynamics. So for this reason, we can create those different kinds of example for less probabilistic in nature manifestational events in front of you that can manifest, that are less, let's say, that are more complex, that are more difficult for them to be, and those who are not necessarily that complex or that majorly significant, right? Those that are more significant, those that are more complex in nature, are not just involving the need to co-create, the need to manifest multiple entities co-creating in the experience. Those things that has the complexity on a larger scale, has a greater deal, a greater expression of complexity because it's more significant and because it involves much more other consciousness that have to be predisposition, right, for that co-creation in front of you, right, or you being part of it. It's much lesser, it's much harder in quantum probability for them to manifest because there needs to be other consciousness being part of the manifestational process. So for that matter, they will use much farther the idea of the synchronicity dynamics rather than the manifestational quality dynamics, that even though it's like the same thing, it's not the same conceptual nature because of some small nuances there is to that, right? So for that matter, with the example, with that which is much more complex and involves much more consciousness, it will not be easy for them to intercept, the conscious, the subconscious mind awareness, and to create an input, create a subconscious script and programming, and to, out of your own, the energy of your own conscious, right, implicate that much more, that much of a greater dynamics, right, into that process and involve all these other consciousness, right? It will have to be a lot of energy that they have to take on. So they will be using much more the idea of the synchronicity, non-organic synchronicity engineering or dynamic, right? Where they are doing practically almost the same thing. It's subconscious scripting, it's subconscious programming, and within the quantum dynamics of the fourth density of the simulation theory dynamics. But in this case, they are leaning much more into the synchronistic process because, again, it's the same dynamics. It's literally the same dynamics, but you're not the one solely into those cycles, into those mental and consciousness cycles of projection and co-creation or creation of that from a manifestational quality in your own reality. You are involving other consciousness, you are involving other factors, other, let's say, energies, other consciousness converging into the same co-creational scenario, converging into the same, let's say, momentum experience, right? A scenario with different inputs, with different, let's say, goals, with different intentions, with different pathways, with different projected lines, right, within the co-created point of convergence of experience, right? So for that matter, you're jumping onto the cycles of others' consciousness, manifestational properties too, and dynamics too, on a co-creational sphere, on a group collective co-creational sphere. So you have to attract them. You have to synchronize yourself into that momentum. So for that matter, they lean more into that synchronistic nature for much more complex, experiences, or engineering of your own reality, engineering of your own physical reality. Knowing, therefore, that minor implications, like minor, severe, or relevant, significant, less significant events, less complex ideas or elements are much more probable in nature. It has less resistance. They are able to do it much more frequently, to a point or to a degree that they get to be able to pretty much use it on a very great basis and with great rate of success for the creation of subconscious programming or subconscious neurolinguistic programming through your own physical reality, using these non-organic synchronicity engineering within these technologies from these specific dynamics that we mentioned, and these manifestational quality dynamics that they engineer too, again, being almost the same exact thing. Words, symbols, or objects that might be encrypting a hidden symbol that is within the programming, the subconscious programming that immediately manifested into the physical reality, right? Where you can sense actually what's behind the object if you are in tune with your subconscious mind, with the let's say with your subtle bodies, and instead of having in the experience itself, instead of feeling or perceiving or being psychically perceptually aware, right, of the description of that object or the meaning from a cognitive perspective of that word or symbol, there is much more of a inherently, intuitively adopted, integrated awareness from what is the meaning behind it. Because again, they are not manifesting for you in front of you. They're not manifesting things in your reality and to your subconscious from the outside to the inside. First manifesting the object, the word or symbol in front of your physical reality, and then for you to look at it and program your subconscious. No, they are doing it through your subconscious directly. They are getting into the wavelength, into the composition of oscillatory frequencies of the networks of the brainwaves are oscillating and vibrating on that which is the subconscious mind layer. So it's getting there, it's mind control, it's getting to the brain itself, to the subconscious mind, and it's immediately programmed into the reality, into your reality construct in front of you. And then you see it, and when you see it, you sense directly in your subtle body, you feel intuitively and empathically the energy and the meaning behind it, even if it's not obvious. And I will put examples to these because it's been directly projected out of your own subconscious that was targeted and that projected these out of mind control targeted subconscious programming, subconscious encrypted hidden words, messages, symbols, concepts, programming ideas, programming beliefs, or programming concepts or meanings, associated elements of information, etc., etc. When different symbols are being programmed to get manifested in your physical reality, when they use this form of subconscious programming, sometimes they might want you to be aware of what it's being programmed within the subconscious in a way that you're seeing a word, you're seeing the object, or you're seeing the the symbol in a conscious way and you see it directly and you become aware of it, and sometimes you even take it as a synchronicity and you believe it's your natural form of synchronicity or whatever. And sometimes there is no need necessarily for awareness to kick in and understand with greater degree why it's being manifested or why there's a repetitive pattern. But for both scenarios, in both scenarios, there is always the awareness that it is repeating, that it is repeating, that it is repeated. Because repetition, ritualistic repetitions, rituals, repetitions, that is the formula for programming. That is the literal formula for programming, subconscious programming. So the more amounts of repetitiveness, ritualistic practices or symbolism appearing or showing up within, again, this layer of the four density consciousness, dynamics within the layer of the subconscious and the higher mind and the higher fractal consciousness, right? The higher density minds that are the subconscious, the superconscious, etc. There is the creation of programming on itself. It starts to take shape into what we can call a program or a system. And if we get farther and a programming idea starts to interact, it starts to be expanded and developed into the, let's say, co-creation into the development of more complex systems where there are more symbols attached to that program symbol or programming idea. There is much more meaning that is associated with that fundamental idea, and we can expand it into more and more and more associated constructs and create a bigger programming construct altogether. Then that system on itself, it's what we call and we can define to be as an inner system. And this inner system takes a lot of much more different ideas like association, disassociation, associational practices, the creation of, let's say, multiple meanings behind the fundamental symbols or ideas that has been used to start that system, like the fundamental base, right? The fundamental base in an inner system always tends to have multiple sublayers within itself of different meanings. And by mentioning all these different ideas, I'm also setting up the base to expand further all of these different aspects of mind control or programming or MK Ultra that I come in this series to talk about in a much more specific and complex level of depth. So the whole concept of inner systems and will be covered and will be expanded further in this following series of MK Ultra, mind control, etc. on my channel. But going back to this form of ritualistic programming by manifesting symbols and synchronies in front of you, and repeatedly in a ritualistic form. So there is the concept of subconscious programming being created. It's something that they use very much a lot, again, because it has a lot of great probabilities of manifesting through the lenses of quantum probability, right? It's not hard to manifest a symbol, a word, an object, or something that doesn't have to take too much complexity in the co-creational process or in the non-organic synchronistic process, right? Which, by the way, I will have to also reinforce that when synchronicity is a factor being used, synchronicity is being altered. Synchronicity is a phenomena that works within the fourth density consciousness, where there is the awareness of the unified field of consciousness, collective consciousness, of the collective subconscious, right? Of the grid of Earth, of the grid of multiple entities being part of a greater field, a greater collective, and also within your own, any other elements of your own current reality, just like your own ecosystem, just like the animals, the plant kingdom, etc. So the whole synchronistic dynamics are much more fluent, let's say, when in touch with these four density layers and when synchronized with the specific harmonics of these higher fractal consciousness that is vibrating with these density dynamics. And for that matter, it's much easier, let's say, to use synchronicity. So, yes, repetition is needed as a form of ritual to create what is called a programming idea. Then you can create an inner system, and then, of course, a program altogether, right? And the reason why repetition is needed, it's because when the first time that there is a specific pattern or idea being repeated, that it's being repeated a number of twice, right, of 2 times, that is the first moment where we can call that a repetition, a ritual. There's no concept of a ritual if it hasn't been performed a minimal number of times. Like, not even twice, I will say 3 times is like the minimal number, like the threshold point of when we call it a repetition, a pattern, because 3 is the threshold number that we need to create a structure, to create a system, right? To create a pattern. If you have two sequences, if you have a sequence of two things, you cannot say that there's a pattern. There's only the repetition of that element. But when you have 3 times followed that element in a sequence, then you can call that a pattern, a repetitive pattern, a common pattern, or a ritual, right? So this will be a little bit the same. There needs to be a minimal number of repeated repetitions to create what it's called a ritual. And when there is a number of repetitive ideas within a programming, what you are performing is basically you are first of all making something vibrate within the subconscious, and it has to be added meaning, of course, because otherwise the soul element on itself doesn't have enough meaning, enough energy of your own consciousness behind it. So it's kind of like not, it doesn't have it can be created to be as complex as you want it, but that will be with the adding of more elements, or the complex, with adding more complexity or more dimensional depth to it, right? But when you have multiple, when you create and you expand the meaning, or the meaning starts to be associated with other elements altogether, you are in the direction of creating what it's called an inner system. But when it's repeated, right, and there's a number of times that you're repeating in your day or in your week or in your month, right, in your life, in a synchronistic, and this is a key element, in a synchronistic dynamic, then that within the subconscious is created as a form of program, as a form of programming idea. And because when it meets itself in a different point of space and time, in a different date, in a different space, in a different location, in a different state of consciousness, you're starting to add more background to that element, not just because you are attaching meaning, not because you are associated necessarily with the elements of your surrounding, but because just the idea of being a different memory, a different time and date, a different point of space and time, a different state of being altogether, a different, let's say, angle of your reality, the whole context and background, although it might be irrelevant to the programming idea itself, it has a different context altogether. It is presented in a different background altogether. It is a different experience of your reality. It's a different angle of your reality. It's a different moment within your life, a different experience, a different memory, a different momentum. So all of that in repetition, in different frames of your own linear time perspective, of your own cycles of energy within the calendar, like dates or weeks or months, right? That on itself being repeated across time and space on itself, it's adding up the idea of the creation of pattern, because it's in different frames of time and space, it's in different contexts, maybe it's in different scenarios, in different expressions of it, even though it's the same element, right, the same idea. It's a different momentum within your own consciousness. Also, you're doing other thing, you're doing other task, or you're with different people, whatever that might be. Doesn't need to be relevant to the intrinsic meaning of the element itself, but it has different backgrounds, it has different contexts. So by adding up that different, let's say, context and different time, and within momentum, within your linear time perspective, you are creating a pattern. You are creating the differentiation of the element itself on different repetitions, and you're creating a pattern. And not only that, but also there is the idea that on itself, it's created as when it's created firstly as a pattern, as a ritual, it's created as a cycle of energy. It's one repetition, one cycle, and the more that you keep creating it, the more that you keep manifesting it, the more that you keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. It is the cycle of repetition, the cycle of which that element within your consciousness is vibrating at starts adding more momentum, it starts adding more energy by the repetitiveness of it, and thus the cycles of repetition being enhanced and enhanced and enhanced and repeated as frequently as they can. The more that is repeated within time and space and within your consciousness, the more vibrational, the more it amplifies, let's say, the more that it is amplified, the repetition and the cycle and the vibration of that whole element. So it only generates more and more and more and more momentum. So the more that you repeat it, the more frequently that you repeat it, the more momentum that you gain. And by adding more momentum and creating a greater repetition of it, you are making it vibrate more within your own subconscious mind and within your own conscious mind. Therefore, it holds more energy of awareness, it holds more energy, more conscious energy to it. And the more energy, of course, the bigger that is created, and the bigger the effect within consciousness and within your own reality, therefore. But on itself, you're just creating a dynamic pattern loop where you are reinforcing and reinforcing the same idea to a point in which, again, it gains more momentum, more energy of your consciousness, and it gets amplified, like as if it was an antenna. And as that is happening, there's a whole neural network in which that programming idea or inner system can be found that starts to expand and expand and expand farther. So remember that they use the subconscious mind in all cases for the manifestation of the information, the data, the input, the symbol, the word, idea that they want to program in you through this subconscious mind because of these dynamics of the fourth density of consciousness, this quantum consciousness dynamics. And in some cases, they will manifest the idea of a symbol, and it will be found in either the ceiling or the pattern on the floor of some place, or in a specific drawing, or in a specific construction that you have in front of you, or even a something within your own clothes, something within whatever that you might have in front. And when it's an idea, when it's much more generic and more ambiguous, it can take into the form of multiple different even objects or different forms of representing that whole idea, that meaning, let's say. And on the other hand, if they are more interested in manifesting a specific word, a specific literal word, they can manifest the word, and they will be sometimes even getting to use it in neuro-linguistic programming. When they want to manifest a specific word, they also play with the idea of the quantum mechanics of the probabilities that they can find of how easy, how dynamic is to manifest that word. And for that matter, sometimes they will take shortcuts. They will take the expressions, the linguistic expression that is the simplest or the most ambiguous and the easiest to find within non-organic synchronicity. And in the case that they don't want you to see the word directly because they want to create a form of neuro-linguistic programming that is more of creating the energy and the meaning behind and the back in the subconscious, and just creating the subconscious, let's say, subtle programming without your mental mind necessarily knowing, and preferably not knowing, they will be fine using mostly neuro-linguistic programming. So as you can see, there are many different ideas, there are many different ways in which they can use these dynamics of the fourth density consciousness, these quantum mechanics, in which, again, they are using it to either manifest in front of you the screen, which they will be programming the subconscious of a subject in an MQ Ultra program or in a mind control program of any kind. And on the other side, they can also use subconscious programming to manifest on itself also the other way around, that is specific idea, that is specific programming idea or symbol that is programmed within, or concept or element, etc. And also they can utilize these subconscious dynamics and these technologies to get into to synchronize into the mechanics, into the specific brainwave configurations of your own subconscious mind, of your own subconscious brain, so that they can manipulate, they can create a form of manifestation, or even the engineer the natural phenomena of synchronicity in a non-organic way to interfere with you, interfere with your reality, and engineer the manifestation of your reality through these dynamics of the fourth density of consciousness, through the simulation theory. The other ways in which they are able to engineer and to manipulate your physical reality, your simulation in front of you through the programming of subconscious encrypting or subconscious predictive programming within the construct of the non-organic synchronicity that they create, is by understanding that everything that is vibrating, every single vibrational pattern, vibrational frequency that is programmed within the layers of the higher fractal consciousness, when they are vibrating there and they want to collapse the system, they create a quantum system where those frequency patterns have to find a way to collapse the wave function. So in a sense, in a way, in a simpler way, it's like the finding the physical reality needs to create the pathways dynamically for that element, for that specific wavelength, that quantum system that is to collapse, to manifest the pathways where it allows them to make sense, or it allows that energy, that information, that input, that data, or that programmed idea to manifest coherently in regards to your physical reality's flow of manifestation of, let's say, of the narrative of it, of the continuation of it. So imagine that, for instances, that they have programmed within the subconscious using this tool and this dynamics of non-organic synchronicity that they want your phone to break. For example, they want to break the screen of your phone. If they are creating that programming idea and they are creating it in the subconscious and they are putting that system into action, into collapsing the wave function, then if they are altering it, intervening, intercepting with your subconscious mind to collapse that wave function within the programming from the subconscious, then when they create that programming again and they put it into action, the frequency patterns that are vibrating of the subconscious mind, if it's again not finding any resistance, it will manifest all the pathways for that probability to happen if they can find those pathways. So imagine that you're holding your phone and they find within that momentum that there is a high probability, and within the, let's say, manifested reality ahead, within the momentum of the now that not only comprehends this just now present moment, but a little bit into the past and a little farther into the future, if you understand what I mean, that altogether will, if it's highly probable, it will find the pathways, or it will calculate the pathways to manifest those specific vibrational patterns that are vibrating above into the below, and thus collapsing that wave function, that quantum system. So sometimes it will be there, but it will be delayed because of the added resistance of the situations or the circumstances not being able to happen. But if they are truly insisting in that to manifest, they will start to calculate what is the momentum, what is the timing, or if there is a moment that happens to synchronize where they can play that predictive programming and that system can find a pathway within the lower layers, within the lower fractal consciousness, to manifest the pathways for that energy to flow, for that system to collapse, and for that energy to flow into manifestation with the least of the resistance into a success of the operation, let's say. And something that I will also cover further about how they're using the simulation theory dynamics to create forms of control. It will be much more focused on the idea of collective targeting, or the, let's say, use of the collective for this form of control of the simulation, the control of their own simulation around them. And eventually, through the engineering, through the creation, the manipulation on what it's called the grid, by creating what it's called their own grid, their own, let's say, synthetic grid, that yes, it has references and it has direct connection to what we call the matrix, but it's not just the concept of the matrix that they created for us, that again, it follows the same dynamic, it follows the same way for the same concepts in which they have created it, although that has a much more, that the engineering to create the matrix that we know has taken further and much more complex steps. It's something that it's created in a much more complex, multi-layered fashion, and these different grids that they are working, that different elite factions are working right now to create, are not just within the concept of the matrix, of the inverted inner systems matrix, or the inverted matrix, the Saturn cube, etc. And I will also explain further in the future how they have been using these simulation theory dynamics and technologies to create a form of engineering within the subconscious collective mind, within the morphogenetic field, and within the grid of Earth, to recreate another grid apart from the natural one that the collective, that all of us, the whole collective and all the Earth consciousness exist in, but also on itself. The whole idea of the creation of their own grid, the engineering, the use of all these different MK Ultra, the use of all these different concepts, metaphysical concepts, simulation theory dynamics, four density dynamics, and mind control, the engineering of the subconscious, not just within the individual, but the collective, the morphogenetic field, etc., to engineer the grid to create their own, which they can, let's say, create a matrix, a programmable matrix reality where they trap consciousness, where they trap in entire collectives, which we know to be the so-called matrix. And even within the matrix, specific factions and groups who are using this specific theory and these specific technologies and programs to engineer and create their own grid, where they go as far as optimizing the flow of these natural phenomena of synchronicity to their own advantage by creating collective subconscious programming of all the consciousness that are found within this grid, this programmable grid, that mostly, of course, are drowned in there through this fractalization property and are utilized through these MQ Ultra mind control forms of programming, through these fractalization properties again, and a grid also in which they are using forms of even parasitism, inverted systems where they can traffic things such as energy, concepts, ideas, money, etc. Anything that they can encrypt within a symbol, within a concept, and in an inverted system, and drowning. And by making the energy fall into this matrix, being able to gather it and lose it, just in the same way that these negative consciousness and negative regressive groups have created and engineered the matrix, so that when energy falls into that matrix, they can lose it, they can gather it, right, in a parasitic way, and create forms of ritualistic programming to also, yes, perform these very same actions that we have expressed right now, which is parasitism and the, let's say, subconscious form of programming to an inverted inner systems to basically steal and gather and parasite energy from individuals or from entire collective consciousness. Let's say that in a way, they create languages, they create subconscious scripting, they create rituals. And this specific topic is something that there is an entire war on it, which is the fight to own the greed, that which will go much farther in the next episode. And of course, not to mention that we also need to cover how they are using engineering, these forms of simulation theory dynamics for density dynamics and mind control through fractalization and trauma and abuse to create forms of genetic engineering, morphogenetic engineering, subconscious engineering to program their matrix and their own greed, which again they are using to create, to be able to engineer their whole programmable reality, their whole physical reality that there is to experience, where they are again using fractalized consciousness and forms of collective fractalization, not just on individuals, but on collectives, to create this subconscious scripting, a subconscious programming, and reprogram their entire matrix, the matrix that they get to experience in this whole reality that involves all of us. So I hope you like this video. If you enjoy my content, as always, you can give it a like and you can comment and you can subscribe for further updates. Thank you so much for enjoying. I am enjoying this series so far. There's so much to uncover and to go through. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Ciao.